the reason for our seminar is that we have Dr. Andy Rowe here in town visiting Washington, D.C., and we took the opportunity of bringing him here because he has some valuable things to say, as many of you know from before. Andy's a Canadian evaluator, but he has a strong academic background as a PhD in economics from the London School of Economics, but he's been working for a long time as a consultant for different organizations, doing especially evaluations related to natural resources management, environmental things, conflict resolution, often in those contexts and so forth. His current work is, for example, with the UN Environment Program, UNEP, as well as the US EPA, with some foundations, with the Canadian government, and so forth. So a variety of experiences from the field. And although Andy always emphasizes that he's a practitioner and not an academic, having said that, he has also published a number of things that are quite important, and one of the reference papers that I always use is his paper where he outlines this issue of a dual evaluant system for coupled natural and human systems evaluation, which was published, I think, in 2002 in the American Journal of Evaluation, and that's very important paper. But he's also developed a couple of evaluation approaches and methods, including this rapid impact evaluation approach that we are talking about today, and another technique is this negotiated alternatives technique, which is both of these speak to this whole thing about natural resources management, environmental management, conflict resolution, multiple perspectives, and so forth amongst stakeholders. But I shouldn't be speaking more than this. So what we will do, Andy has requested that the seminar would be in two parts, basically. He will first speak for, 15, 20 minutes perhaps, something like that, and then we will open it up for discussion for another 15 minutes or so, and then he will continue with the rest of his speak, and then we'll open it up again at the end of the presentation. Like I said, so there are people online, and lots of them. I hope you can all hear us and see the presentation and see the video or the live stream. We have taken the liberty of muting your microphones so as to avoid any noise in the room. However, we have Xenia here with her computer, and you have access online to comments. So please send your comments to all, and questions and comments, and Xenia will compile them and will ask them and make the comments on your behalf at a suitable time. Okay, having already spent several minutes of our precious time, so I hand it over to Andy Rowe.
Basically, you all know the concept of elevator speeches. So rapid impact evaluation costs under $25,000. It takes less than 2 months to execute. We don't require any new data. We don't require the program to change, and we get good quality results where we've been able to test them. They're proving to be valid and reliable. But of course, it's very much a work in progress, and we learn as we proceed. Page down. The arrows. So this is the outline of what I want to talk about today, and I really don't want to pursue all the neat stuff we do within rapid impact evaluation and stuff in too much detail because we have a limited amount of time. And I think the questions are, what is it? How has it been used so far? What does it take to do it? What do you get out of it? And a little bit of how it works. And then that'll be the first half. And then the second half, we'll go into some of the new methods. And I'm structuring it that way because the new methods are entirely portable. They're not constrained to rapid impact evaluation. They can be used in all kinds of other settings with other evaluation approaches. I think our approach to counterfactual, I know that some very prominent evaluators are very excited by it and want to start using it. And it's designed to be something, it's an approach to counterfactual. We use counterfactuals all the time in evaluation, and therefore it can be used for anything. So I want to spend a bit of time in the second half talking about some of these elements, but not going into the real details on these. Now, just one thing that, if you have questions for clarification, if something just isn't clear to you, please send us the question or raise your hands as we go, because if it's not clear to you, it's not going to be clear to anyone else probably either. I've probably managed to confuse everyone as much as I can confuse one person. So in my experience, I've been doing evaluation now for perhaps 30 years or more perhaps. And at some point, it got really frustrating that we were trying to convert programs and projects and all the whole policies to having a results focus. But evaluation would say, well, if you really want us to evaluate your results, you're going to have to spend $500,000. You're going to change your intervention, or we're going to take a year or two to do that. And it was almost dishonest. We were asking them, we're holding them accountable for results, but we weren't coming up with any kind of approach that would allow them to, as Michael Scriven wrote probably about 15 years ago, to get a preview summative, a preview take on what their results, how they were doing, so that they could adaptively manage their intervention to get better results. And we have all kinds of gaps in where we can do reasonable jobs of evaluating impacts. In particular, in the development world, projects. Usually, project is, I don't know, it might be $2 million, it might be $5 million, it might be $50,000. But it's not big enough scale to warrant an impact evaluation. Yet it's really important we get knowledge of impacts on these projects. Another one is complex settings. The word complex, everyone, sort of when the word complex came to evaluation, all evaluations became complex. I think because no one wanted to say, well, we're doing a simple evaluation. They all became complex. But we do have complex settings. In particular, the settings that Juha refers to as nexus settings, or I call two-system evaluants. But in the ecology literature, or let's just say the political economy of environmental political economy, they're referred to as CHAN settings, coupled human and natural systems. And these are hard because in evaluation, what we do is we try and calm the moving parts in an intervention and in the beneficiary or the affected population so that we can focus on the impacts we want. Well, if we've got moving parts in two systems and they're connected so that they're each affecting, so if something moves here, it's going to move something over in the other system. It gets really hard to calm those moving parts. So I think we can claim that these are complicated, if not complex, settings we're often doing evaluation in. And the Jeff, that's the territory that Jeff works in. It's the territory of the SDGs. So it's a coming territory that every evaluator working in development is going to have to embrace and deal with. So that's sort of our design frustration, specifically, or the frustration that drove design. Specifically, what we were designing for was for conflict resolution, use of conflict resolution or mediation to address big environmental disputes. and by big, they would perhaps rise to $3 or $4 billion in terms of remediation and settlements, but they also worked in smaller ones. Now, the problem with conflict resolution is that they could never assess their impacts. They could never evaluate their impacts, what difference they made. What were the economic and what were the environmental effects of using dispute resolution compared to something else? So we got funding to develop a methodology from that. That became rapid impact evaluation. And it's growing to, well, if it works for decision processes, it should work for decisions. And basically a program is a decision. We're going to do this intervention this way. And then with the help of people in South Africa, I realized it's not just these end of cycles or summative studies, it's also for formative and developmental. Because really within rapid impact evaluation, because we're saying we can do quite a good job of forecasting or assessing what the impacts are going to be in the economic domain, the social domain, and in the environmental domain without the intervention having run its course, without these impacts having appeared. So that's, it's a natural and very useful addition to what we can do in formative and in developmental evaluation. There's a quote on the screen. I just want to give you a second to read. It's by John Tukey. It's old now. He's dead, unfortunately. He was a very good American statistician. And this is almost, of course, we didn't know this at the time, but this is the touchstone for rapid impact evaluation. And he says it's better to have an approximate answer to the right question than a precise answer to the wrong question. And I think evaluation, a lot of our methods have pursued precision, and in order to get precision, have narrowed the questions so that the questions aren't necessarily of salience to the decision makers that need the information to use them. And they've narrowed the territory in which you can actually assess impacts. So this is really if you want to describe rapid impact evaluation in a simple sentence, that would be John Tukey's has done it for us. Now, I think it's important to, I know that the RCT and the comparison group impact evaluation people, when I talk about rapid impact evaluation, two things happen. One is they get really irritated because they think I'm saying this is better than what you do. I'm not. This is just another method to get to impacts. It's a lower cost, quicker, more feasible method. It's more adaptable and flexible, and it's therefore different. And sometimes it works well in some settings, better than those other methods. Sometimes it doesn't work as well as those other methods. And it has as much to do with the use we want to make of evaluation and things like that. I'm an economist, so I've done RCTs, I've done comparison groups. I love them. I love doing them for two reasons. One is there's a set of rules. So all you got to do is follow the rules and adapt and implement the rules. And the thing just proceeds, and you get your results, and everyone believes the results because it's very impressive methodology. So as an evaluator, that stuff is, I find it easier to do. Intellectually, I mean, it's not unchallenging to do it. I'm just saying that as an evaluator pursuing use, it actually works quite well. Unfortunately, I don't find very many situations where I can use them. And that's because of the territory I work in. I work in sustainable development. I work in natural resource management. And because of scale issues, size, all kinds of issues, we just can't, it isn't possible to afford those methods, but also they don't work very well because we're talking about the methods basically want to calm moving parts. We have coupled systems that are affecting each other, where it's really difficult to have the type of data resources and to do the type of controls in two active systems that are coupled and affecting each other than it is within a single system, say within just dealing with education, stuff like that. So it's nothing, rapid impact evaluation is a supplement to what we have. It can be used alone or mixed with other methods. I think we're generally moving towards mixed methods of rapid impact evaluation wants to be part of other methods. It provides vehicles that you can assess your whole range of evaluation issues and criteria within rapid impact, within the vehicles we have, but our focus, what it brings to the table, is we can do impacts. We have another way of doing impacts and integrating that with, excellent, thank you. I've asked Juha to give me progress checks on time, because I can get carried away with this stuff quite easily. These are some of the settings where we're applying it. In applying rapid impact evaluation, it really requires a very modest level of funding. It really doesn't require much to get going. We could start one tomorrow, as long as the conditions were right. Someone was hiring us to do it, of course. But really importantly is that what I call the program stakeholders, and I'm going to elaborate on that later, but basically what a program stakeholder is all the interests who can affect the success of the intervention and those interests that are affected by the intervention. So it includes beneficiaries, but not just the intended beneficiaries, but the unintended ones. We were talking this morning about poachers as part of a salmon protecting and growing salmon stocks. Well, poachers are not an intended beneficiary of having more salmon in the rivers, but they certainly are affected by having more salmon in the rivers and by the salmon enforcement mechanisms that are in place. They have an interest in salmon. And if we exclude them, we miss a lot that is going on that we need to bring into the evaluation. So the concept of the program stakeholder group is a very broad setting, including affected, not just beneficiary populations, and also including all those other interests that can affect the success, is one of the foundations, one of the core elements of rapid impact evaluation. It's a core element for two reasons. One is it means that we have everyone who's going to affect success, so that conceptually we should have a smaller residual that we can't explain because we've got all this other stuff already in the room at the table working with us. But secondly, it affects use. We know, and rapid impact evaluation could be the only evaluation approach that is designed around use. Use isn't just an add-on that we do, it's in the DNA of rapid impact evaluation. And so the engagement of all these interests and all these program stakeholder interests, it contributes to the quality of the evaluation, but it also is a precondition for getting use. And the second thing we do is we treat the evaluation as a joint knowledge process with the program stakeholders, so that they're involved right from the outset and at various stages in the evaluation process. And that aligns with contemporary models of use of sub-global environmental assessments, of science knowledge, of evaluation use literature, and all of this. It's a joint knowledge process that focuses on the process, not the products. Other than the engagement of the program stakeholders, there's not really much we need to do this. We'll be we draw on science experts. We need some science expertise. So we're most comfortable where there is a science. So obviously in natural resource management, climate, things like that, there's science. Over in epidemiology, there's science. We can do that. We find that some of the areas we're working in now, the sciences we're dealing with are the sciences to do with diffusion of innovation and the adoption of innovations. And there, the science isn't as clear, but we're finding our way to the right set of metrics within that, and that seems to be working well. But basically, there has to be a good enough knowledge base for us to work, and I'm not sure what the threshold is. I thought with diffusion we might have reached the threshold, but it actually works there, so that's okay. But we'll run into it at some point. There are three methods, aside from it being use-inspired, We've developed a whole new class of counterfactuals that we call the scenario-based counterfactual. We used to call it the negotiated counterfactual. And Michael Patton says, I love the counterfactual, I hate the name. And you always take advice from Michael Patton. So we changed the name. We have metrics very simple metrics for forecasting future effects that have not yet occurred. And I think these are useful and transportable. And then the whole use-inspired approach and the focusing on interests or new things that rapid impact evaluation, new methods that rapid impact evaluation, I think is bringing to evaluation in general, but that are also quite core to think. It's always useful to look at what we don't need. So we don't need to change the intervention. We don't have to have a whole bunch of data as we need for comparison groups. We don't need to access the participants. We're going to deal with their interests, representatives of their interests. Participants' voices, beneficiary voices, will be part of the evaluation, but we don't need to go to all of them. We don't need, for environmental stuff, we don't have to go out and take field measurements. Field measurements are always spurious anyway. I mean, you know, if you want to look at nutrients in a pasture, well, it depends on whether you're going to take your measure at the edge of the field, the slope of the field, all this stuff. I mean, a pasture is not a pasture. So field measurements are so heavily contextual that they aren't actually that used for a lot of evaluation. So we found ways around that I think are quite useful. So what do you get out of it? Well, here's the listing of what you get. You can see it on the screen. But basically, we can, our claim is that we can tell you what the environmental effects are. And we talk about these in 3 terms, and we're not very careful about how we talk about them. Our first place we go are to the direct effects. These are the direct environmental outcomes, the direct changes that you'll see as a result of your intervention. These direct effects combine to reach impacts, and they combine together and with other stuff to reach the impacts. And that's the way it goes in natural resources. If we're dealing with salmon populations, we can influence water quality, temperature, flow, barriers to passage of salmon up and down the rivers. We can affect the responding grounds, etc. But the salmon go to sea. And all this stuff combines and has different levels of importance in different rivers and streams and ecosystems. So we know that we can reach to water quality, temperature, but we can't observe, we can't make a judgment about salmon populations in the same way. We make them, but we don't do it in the same way because they're compounded, they're too complex, and we need to deal with them in a different way, which we do. And really, all we're talking about is outcomes, different combinations of outcomes, how they combine to contribute to impacts. We're talking about the same thing. So the other things you get about it, as I said, we have these vehicles that will allow you to gather information about other questions and information. You have really good prospects that the assessments of the effects will be valid and reliable. They're not guaranteed. They aren't guaranteed in any method. But rapid impact evaluation pays a lot of attention to reliability and validity. You also have very good prospects that it's going to be used because it's designed around what we know about use-inspired research. And I think most importantly, you've got good prospects because of the way we do it that decision makers and key stakeholders will regard the evaluation as salient, addressing questions that are important to them, and reporting in a timely, giving them information in a timely fashion, and that they'll also find the evaluation to be legitimate, that is fair and unbiased, and credible, that is, it makes sense and it can be reproduced. So having, let me give you some examples of this, and I'm not going to talk to these examples. These are just from some groups of evaluations that we've conducted. And what you can see is that we're evaluating effects within both the natural system and the human system. That the results up there have to do with cost effectiveness, they have to do with social capital, they have to do with environmental effects. And if we go to the next group, the same thing. They're in both systems. The other thing you can see is that we're talking, when we talk about environmental effects, we're talking about a percentage improvement. We expect a 15% or a 15 to 30% improvement in environmental effects. We don't say we're expecting a 23.5% change in environmental effects because that would be false precision. Decision makers are quite happy knowing that A, it's going to be a positive sign or knowing it will be a negative sign, and then knowing roughly the order of magnitude of the achievement. They're happy with that. They can't deal with any greater precision than that. So what do we do within this? And there's no real magic in it. You'll find that everything within rapid impact evaluation is thoroughly familiar to an evaluator. We use comparative method to get to impacts. What are the effects that we estimate likely to occur under the intervention, and what would they be under counterfactual? And the difference is what we can attribute to the intervention. That's standard procedure within a lot of evaluation which uses comparative approaches. We triangulate assessments. And, you know, the typical thing when we talk about triangulation are three legs in the stool. And if you think of what a three-legged stool is, they're not vertical legs. If you had three vertical legs, it would tip. You need four legs if they're vertical. They're angled out. And what that gives you is stability of something to sit on. By triangulating, we get stability of judgments. And that's really what we're after. And so we quite systematically triangulate within rapid impact evaluation. Now, this came out after we did it, but the Government Accounting Office in the U.S. Did some, when the RCT debate on education came up, Congress said, well, what are the methods that you can use that are acceptable to evaluate the impacts, to judge the impacts of an intervention such as education? Government Accounting Office identified 5. They're up there. We want to be rapid. We had as our design ideal that we wanted something that was rapid, that was flexible, that could go to small projects, that was fairly nimble, but there was still very good quality. So we were obviously interested in looking at it from the point of view of cost, intrusion, duration, data requirements. We also did this with ethical issues and feasibility and things like that. And when I workshop this, the results come out basically like this. The red are the harder ones, the highest, the green are the lowest. And this is why we're at expert groups or expert judgment is our method, because it's the one that's green. It's the one that we can do cheaply and quickly, where we don't have to spend a lot of time gathering data. We don't have the costs with gathering data, all that sort of thing. So it's a very pragmatic thing that took us to expert judgment. And I'm very mindful. I used to be, when I present this, there's one person who's well known in impact evaluation circles who I've co-presented with a number of times, and you can always hear him whispering to someone. He says, well, you know what they say about expert judgment, and then a pregnant pause, and they say, they're often wrong. Well, I've done RCTs, I've done comparison groups, I was often wrong. I've done simulation models where I was not only wrong in magnitude, but I got the sign wrong. I mean, these methods are, you know, they're not guaranteed to get to the right answer. Neither is expert judgment, but we really work at getting it right. We really work at reliability and bias and validity and making sure that we have these all these things on board. We triangulate 3 expert judgments, and it's important to think about the legs of the stool. So there are 2 things. There's the intervention, and there's the science of the intervention, and we need to be able to address both. So we have what we call the program stakeholder group. It's defined there. It's all the interests who are influenced or can influence the intervention. We have subject matter experts that we convene in a panel. The program stakeholder group, we interview them, we survey them, we work with them in number of ways, and we bring in technical advisors. And they work with us from the outset, from the beginning, so they gain a lot of knowledge about the intervention. So we have three groups. They're independent groups. They have different knowledge about the intervention and the science, and we use the same metrics but with different approaches to gain the information. So it's a fairly classical approach to triangulation. We've got these new methods that I've already mentioned to you. And I want to stop there before we go into the new methods and just take a pause for questions and conversation, because that's the overview of the approach.